The morning rain drummed against the windows of Sweet Dreams Bakery as Karis Monroe arranged freshly baked cupcakes in the display case. Each one was topped with a tiny sugar violet, her signature touch. She loved these early hours before the customers arrived, when she could think quietly and savor the scent of vanilla and cinnamon. Welcome to Voices of Auntie Mae. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Now, let's jump back into my story. I'm sure you'll love it if you keep listening till the end. The phone rang at 7:30 on the dot, which was unusual. Customers rarely called so early. "Hello, this is Karis." Karis rested the receiver on her shoulder while continuing to arrange the cupcakes. "Good morning, Ms. Monroe. I'm Barclay Quinn from the law firm Quinn, Owen & Associates. I'm calling about the estate of your godmother, Ms. Eris Holloway." Karis froze. Eris had passed away 3 weeks ago after a long battle with cancer. Karis had attended the funeral, but had since immersed herself in her work, trying not to think about the fact that she would never see the woman who had replaced her mother again. "Oh, yes, of course. What can I do for you?" "Ms. Holloway left you an inheritance. We need to meet for the paperwork. It's quite urgent given the nature of the assets." "Assets?" Karis interjected. "I don't understand. Eris never spoke of an inheritance." "Your godmother left you her restaurant, Ms. Monroe, the Legacy Crown." Karis's hand trembled, and one of the cupcakes fell to the floor. The Legacy Crown was the most prestigious restaurant in Atlanta. Politicians, celebrities, and business moguls dined there. Eris had built it up over 30 years, from a small cafe into a legend. "There must be some mistake," Karis murmured. "No mistake, Ms. Monroe. Ms. Holloway was very clear in her instructions. You were like a daughter to her. She thought you were the only person who could keep the restaurant's legacy alive." An hour later, Karis was sitting in Mr. Quinn's office, reviewing the papers that confirmed her ownership of the restaurant, valued at several $1,000,000. "Eris knew her diagnosis for over a year," the lawyer explained. "She planned everything carefully. In addition to the restaurant, there is a wine cellar, contracts with vendors, and special provisions for the staff. She left a letter with instructions." Karis took the envelope with trembling hands. On it was written, "To my dearest Karis," in Iris's familiar slanted handwriting. "Can I take this home now?" "Yes, of course, but we need to finalize the transfer of rights in the next few days. The restaurant can't be without management for long." Karis nodded, still unable to believe what was happening. She remembered the first time she walked into the Legacy Crown's kitchen as a 9-year-old girl. Her mother had worked there as a pastry chef until she died of pneumonia when Karis was 14. Eris had then taken her under her wing, paid for her education, and taught her everything she knew about baking. "You're special, Karis," Eris often told her. "You have hands that feel the dough and a heart that puts love into it." Lost in her memories, Karis barely noticed signing all the necessary papers. Everything she knew about the restaurant business she had learned from Eris, but running the Legacy Crown felt like an impossible task. When Karis arrived home, it was noon. She hoped to have time to read Eris's letter before Jarvis returned from work, but his car was already parked in the front yard of their small house in an Atlanta suburb. They had met 6 years ago at a charity dinner hosted by Jarvis's company. Karis was in charge of the desserts. Jarvis approached her with her lavender and honey cake in hand and told her he had never tasted anything like it in his life. A year later, they were married. "Karis, are you home?" Jarvis's voice sounded tense. She entered the living room and saw her husband sitting on the sofa with a glass of whiskey. 2 o'clock in the afternoon was unusual for that. "What's wrong? Why aren't you at work?" Jarvis looked up at her. He was an attractive man, tall, dark-haired, with regular facial features. But now his usually confident expression had been replaced by something close to panic. "My mother called me. She says you inherited the Legacy Crown. Is it true?" Karis froze. She hadn't told anyone about the inheritance yet. How could he know? "So it's true." Jarvis took a gulp of his whiskey. "I mean, Karis, why didn't you tell me?" "I just got back from the lawyer. I was going to tell you tonight. Mom is friends with the wife of one of the waiters at the Crown. They're all in shock. Aris left the restaurant to you, not the chef or anyone in management." Karis felt herself blush. Of course, many people would be surprised. The owner of a small bakery suddenly getting one of the best restaurants in the city. "Aris was my godmother. We were very close." But a real restaurant. Jarvis stood up and started pacing the room. "Do you have any idea what this means? This isn't a bakery with 3 tables and homemade cupcakes. It's a multi-million-dollar business." Karis clutched the envelope containing Aris's letter. She knew Jarvis was right. She had never managed a business of this magnitude, but Aris believed in her. "I can do this. Aris taught me a lot." "Karis, be realistic." Jarvis stopped in front of her. "You make beautiful cakes, but what do you know about wine lists? About hiring staff? About balance sheets?" "I can learn," she replied quietly. Jarvis ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he made when he was particularly irritated. "Mom said it was crazy, and I agree with her." At the mention of Tamsin Niles, Karis felt a familiar knot in her stomach. Her mother-in-law had never hidden her disappointment in her son's choice of a wife. She called Karis a baker, like it was a dirty word. "What does this have to do with your mother?" Karis asked, trying to hide her irritation. Jarvis looked away. "She's coming over for dinner. She wants to discuss the situation." "Discuss my inheritance, Jarvis?" "Our inheritance," he corrected. "We're married, remember?" The words hurt Karis. In 6 years of marriage, Jarvis had never shown any interest in her bakery. He had considered it a nice hobby that brought in a little money, and now that there was a valuable asset, suddenly everything was ours. That evening, the house filled with the smell of Tamsin's expensive perfume. As always, she entered without knocking, with her characteristic, "I'm here, darlings." Tall, with perfectly styled blonde hair and flawless makeup, Tamsin looked younger than her 60 years. "Karis, honey." Tamsin brushed a quick kiss against her daughter-in-law's cheek. "What incredible news. You must be in shock." "Hello, Tamsin." Karis tried to smile. "Yes, it was unexpected." "I'm sure it was. Aris was always eccentric." Tamsin walked into the living room, tossing her coat into her son's arms. "Remember, Jarvis, I told you how she refused to serve the state representative because he was 15 minutes late? She had quite a temper." Karis remained silent. Tamsin had never known Aris. She had heard all those stories from her friends in Atlanta's high society, to which she longed to belong. During the dinner, Karis had prepared in advance. Tamsin began to outline her takeover plan. "I've spoken to Fielding," she said to her son, ignoring Karis. "He thinks we need to move fast. The restaurant market is booming, especially for luxury places like the Legacy Crown." "Who is Fielding?" Karis asked. "Oh, just my financial advisor," Tamsin dismissed. "It doesn't matter. The important thing is we have 2 options. Either we sell the restaurant now while its reputation is still intact, or—" She paused dramatically. "I could take over." Karis nearly choked on her wine. "Excuse me, what?" "Don't look at me like that, dear," Tamsin laughed. "I wasn't always a housewife. I worked as an accountant for a large company before I married, and I always dreamed of owning my own restaurant." "You never spoke of it," Karis commented. "There was no reason to," Tamsin shrugged. "But now that we have the opportunity, Jarvis, honey, say something." Jarvis looked uncertain, shifting his gaze from his mother to his wife. "Mom has a point, Karis. She has experience in finance, and I could help with the technical side, the website, reservation systems, that sort of thing." "And what about me?" Karis asked quietly. "Aris left the restaurant to me." Tamsin patted her hand. "Honey, no one says you can't be involved. You can do the desserts. They're wonderful. But management, that's another matter. You need experience, contacts." Karis remembered the unopened letter from Aris in her purse. She should have read it sooner. "I need to think about this," she said. "It's a huge decision." "Of course, dear." Tamsin smiled, but her eyes remained cold. "But don't think too long. Business doesn't wait." After dinner, when Tamsin had left, Karis finally found time to open Eris's letter. She locked herself in the bathroom, the only place she could be alone. "My dearest Karis," Eris wrote, "if you are reading this, it means I'm gone. Don't be too sad. I lived a good life, and I am proud of what I created, especially proud of you. I am leaving you the legacy crown, not because I have no other heirs, but because you are the only person I trust with my creation. You have everything it needs: taste, intuition, hard work, and most importantly, heart. You love giving people not just food, but joy. It is a rare gift. I know you doubt yourself, but remember that I also started with a small cafe and no experience. All I had was passion and a willingness to learn. The restaurant staff will help you. Chef Bram Cassidy has been my right-hand man for 15 years. Manager Nita Price knows every process. They are waiting for you and are ready to support you. And one more important thing, not all documents and assets were handed over to you today. There are details only Barkley knows. Contact him if you run into any problems. Believe in yourself, as I believe in you. With love, Eris." Karis pressed the letter to her chest, feeling tears run down her cheeks. Eris believed in her, and she couldn't let her godmother down. When she came out of the bathroom, Jarvis was waiting for her in the bedroom with some papers in his hands. "Here." He held out the papers. "It's a power of attorney. Mom thinks it would be easier if you gave her the right to run the restaurant. Temporarily, of course." Karis looked at the papers, and then at her husband. She remembered how they met, how he admired her cakes, how he said she was the most talented woman he had ever met. When had things changed? Or had she simply been unwilling to realize that her husband had always been a weak man, driven by an ambitious mother? "No," Karis said quietly, but firmly. "I won't sign it." Jarvis's face contorted with anger. "Karis, don't be stubborn. You realize you can't handle the restaurant. Mom wants to help you." "Your mother wants to take what is mine." Karis felt her determination grow inside her. Eris believed in me. She knew what she was doing. Jarvis threw the papers on the bed. "Eris was a selfish old woman. She used you all your life, first as a free assistant, then as emotional support, and now she's left you with a business you are guaranteed to fail at." "Don't talk about her like that." Karis raised her voice to her husband for the first time. "You know nothing about my relationship with her. I know my wife has been baking cupcakes in a tiny bakery for 6 years, barely making ends meet." Jarvis moved closer to her. "Suddenly you have a restaurant worth millions? What do you think people will say? What will the Legacy Crown's customers think when they find out their favorite spot is now owned by a woman who has never run anything bigger than a sheet cake?" Every word stung like a whip. Karis felt her confidence melting. Maybe Jarvis was right. Maybe she really couldn't handle it. "I need time to think about this," she said, backing toward the door. "There's no time, Karis." Jarvis grabbed the papers from the bed and followed her. "Mom has already talked to the vendors. They're waiting for a decision. Either you let us help or—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the threat hung in the air. Karis felt cornered. She had never been able to resist aggression, especially from those closest to her. All her life, she had been yielding, compromising, trying to please everyone. "All right," she finally said, "I'll sign, but on the condition that this is a temporary measure, a month, tops, and I want to be kept informed of every decision." The relief on Jarvis's face was almost palpable. "Of course, darling, that's reasonable." He set the papers on the table and held out a pen. Karis took it slowly, feeling the heaviness. Eris's face flashed before her eyes, her confident smile, her words, "Believe in yourself, as I believe in you." At that moment, the phone rang. Karis flinched and dropped the pen. "I'll get it," Jarvis said, clearly annoyed by the interruption. While he was on the phone, Karis looked at the documents. The power of attorney had been drafted by a lawyer, probably the same Fielding. It granted Tamsin total control of the restaurant without restrictions or deadlines. It wasn't a temporary measure. It was a transfer of power. Jarvis returned, his eyes blazing. "It was Mom. She just spoke with the chef at the Crown. He's threatening to quit if management doesn't make a decision by tomorrow. We have to act now, Karis." She knew it was a lie. Bram, the chef, was loyal to Aris to the core. He would never threaten to quit, especially to Tamsin, whom he didn't even know. At that moment, something broke inside Karis. For 6 years, she had endured Jarvis's scorn for her work, Tamsin's condescending comments, their shared belief that she was nothing more than a nice housewife allowed to play at her little business. "No," she said, and this time there wasn't a shadow of doubt in her voice. "What do you mean, no?" Jarvis took a step toward her, his face contorted in rage. "I am not signing those papers. The legacy crown belongs to me. Aris wanted me to have it, and I will not fail her." "Oh, Karis!" Jarvis slammed his fist on the table. "You're going to ruin the restaurant. You're going to ruin a business that took 30 years to build." "Maybe," she looked at him without fear, "but it will be my choice and my responsibility." Jarvis's face turned purple with fury. He snatched up the papers and his phone. "Fine. Since you've made your decision, I'll call my mother. She can handle this." Karis watched him dial the number, strangely calm. She knew she had just crossed a line beyond which her marriage would never be the same, but somehow, that didn't scare her. Tamsin arrived 20 minutes later, as if she had been waiting for the call. She stormed into the house like a fury, not bothering to hide her irritation. "Karis," she began without a greeting. "Jarvis told me everything. I understand you're confused and emotional. Aris's death was a blow, but now is not the time for sentimental decisions." Karis looked at her mother-in-law in silence. For 6 years, she had tried to please this woman, to earn her approval. 6 years of pretending not to notice her manipulation and control over Jarvis. "I've made a decision, Tamsin," Karis said calmly. "I am going to run the restaurant myself." Tamsin let out a short, sharp laugh. "Honey, be realistic. You're a baker, not a businesswoman. The Legacy Crown is a complex machine with dozens of employees, vendors, a high-profile clientele. One wrong move, and everything will collapse. Is that what you want?" "No," Karis shook her head. "That's exactly why I won't give the restaurant to you." Tamsin turned pale, then red with anger. She turned to her son. "Explain to your wife that she is making a mistake." Jarvis looked confused, shifting his gaze from his mother to his wife. "Karis, please, let's be reasonable." "I am being reasonable," Karis retorted. "Aris entrusted the restaurant to me. I have a team that will help me figure it out. I can handle it." "A team?" Tamsin scoffed. "You mean those arrogant cooks and waiters? They won't obey you, Karis. They'll see you're incompetent and walk out." "I'm willing to take that risk." Karis turned to leave. "Stop!" Jarvis grabbed her arm. "You can't just walk away like that. We have to decide this now." Karis pulled her arm free. "There's nothing to decide. The restaurant is mine, and I will run it." Jarvis's face contorted with rage. He rushed to the table where the restaurant documents Karis had brought from the lawyer were sitting. "Enough!" He snatched the papers. "Since you can't make a sensible decision, I will do it for you." "What are you doing?" Karis tried to grab the papers, but Jarvis shoved her away. "What you should have done from the beginning." He turned to his mother. "Here, Mom. The restaurant is yours now. Do with it as you see fit." Tamsin smiled triumphantly, accepting the papers. "Smart boy. I always knew you'd make the right choice." Karis watched the scene, feeling something inside her finally tear apart. Her husband had just handed over her inheritance to his mother, without even asking for her consent. "You can't do that," she said. "These documents are in my name." "Marital property, dear." Tamsin patted her cheek. "Jarvis has as much right to the restaurant as you do, and he chose to entrust it to me. It's legal." Karis knew that wasn't true. An inheritance was not considered community property under Georgia state law, but it didn't matter. Now Tamsin had the papers, and she wasn't going to give them up. Karis looked at Jarvis, trying to see the man she had married, but before her stood a stranger with a hard, smug expression on his face. "You're going to regret this," she said quietly. "I don't think so," he shrugged. "You'll thank us in a month when you see how well the restaurant is doing under Mom's management." Karis silently picked up her purse and jacket. "Where are you going?" Jarvis asked, suddenly concerned. She turned to him with a slight smile. "To my bakery. I have a lot of orders tomorrow." Karis left the house, feeling strangely relieved. The Atlanta night air was cool and smelled of impending rain. She expected to feel crushed by grief or rage after her husband's betrayal. But instead, she only felt a serene determination. She had no desire to return home, where Jarvis and Tamsin were probably still celebrating their victory. She headed to the Sweet Dreams Bakery, the only place she always felt like herself. Sweet Dreams was located in a small shop on a quiet street near downtown. When she opened the door, the smell of vanilla and cinnamon enveloped her like the embrace of an old friend. Karis turned on the light and looked around her small kingdom. 4 tables, a dessert display, a compact kitchen behind a translucent partition. It didn't have the Legacy Crown's luxury, but it had something more important, the feeling of home. Karis took out her phone and dialed a number she rarely used, though it was always in her contacts. "Barclay Quinn," the lawyer answered after the 3rd ring. "Mr. Quinn, this is Karis Monroe. I apologize for calling so late." "Not at all, Ms. Monroe. Is something wrong?" She took a deep breath to gather her thoughts. "The restaurant deeds. My husband took them and gave them to his mother. They believe they have the right to—" "Just a moment." Barclay's voice became sharp as a blade. "You're saying your husband took the property deeds against your will?" "Yes. He said they were marital property." Barclay chuckled. "They are not. Inheritances are not considered marital property under Georgia law, unless specified in the will. But don't worry, Ms. Monroe. We have copies of all the documents, and the originals have already been registered. Whatever your husband and his mother do, they cannot change the title without your notarized signature." Karis felt the tension ease a little. "So, I am still the legal owner of the restaurant?" "Of course. But if they try to act on your behalf without authorization, it could cause problems. I would recommend we meet tomorrow morning to discuss the next steps." "Agreed," Karis said quietly. "Mr. Quinn, Eris mentioned in her letter that not all documents and assets were handed over to me today. She wrote that there are details only you know." Silence fell on the phone. "Yes, that's true," the lawyer finally said. "Ms. Holloway anticipated complications. Let's discuss it tomorrow in my office at 8 o'clock in the morning, before the business day begins." "I'll be there." That night, Karis slept on a small couch in the back room of the bakery. She turned off her phone. She didn't want to hear the calls from Jarvis, which would undoubtedly come when he discovered she hadn't returned home. She walked into Barclay Quinn's office at 8 o'clock in the morning with a paper bag full of still warm croissants. Baking them was a soothing ritual before an important meeting. "Ah, Miss Monroe." Barclay rose from his desk to greet her. He was a tall, slender man with astute eyes behind elegant glasses. "Please, sit down." Karis offered him a croissant, which he accepted gratefully. "Incredible," he muttered, taking a bite. "Now I understand why Eris held you in such high regard." "Mr. Quinn," Karis got straight to the point. What exactly did Eris foresee, and what assets was she talking about in the letter? Barclay wiped his hands with a napkin and opened a desk drawer. Eris knew about her illness for over a year. During that time, she restructured the business. He pulled out a file. The Legacy Crown, as a restaurant, has several components. There is the building which you now own, there is the brand and reputation, but there are other assets arranged separately. He opened the file and began to list them. The wine cellar, valued at over $200,000, is a separate legal entity controlled by a trust. You are the sole beneficiary of that trust. The professional kitchen equipment is leased through another company, also controlled by you. The contracts with the main vendors are in the name of Eris Holloway and Associates, where you are listed as the signing partner. Karis listened with growing astonishment. Why such a complicated structure? Barclay smiled slightly. Eris was not only a talented restaurateur, but also a clever businesswoman. She created this structure to optimize taxes. But now it serves another purpose, to protect the restaurant's most valuable assets from potential wrongdoers. My husband and my mother-in-law, Karis nodded. I don't comment on clients' family relationships, Barkley replied diplomatically, but Eris wanted to make sure you were protected in any case. He slid another document toward her. It was a list of the Legacy Crown's key personnel with contact information. Eris had specifically mentioned Chef Bram Cassidy and manager Nita Price as people she fully trusted. Karis took the list, feeling a lump in her throat. Eris had thought of everything. She had protected her even in death. What do I do now? She wondered. Technically, you can claim the restaurant at any time, Barkley said. But perhaps it's worth waiting and seeing what your husband and his mother do. If they try to act on your behalf without the power of attorney, it would be fraud. Karis hesitated for a moment. Part of her wanted to go immediately to the restaurant and claim her rights, but the other part, the calmer, more calculating one, told her it was better to wait. I'll wait, she decided, but I want to meet with Bram and Nita. I need to know what's happening at the restaurant. After meeting with the lawyer, Karis returned to the bakery. She had to prepare for the opening and then find a way to contact the Legacy Crown staff without drawing the attention of Tamsin and Jarvis. The day passed with the usual worries: baking, serving customers, taking orders for the next week. The familiar routine was reassuring. Among the regular visitors to Sweet Dreams was the local mail carrier, Franklin, an older man with kind eyes and a lover of blueberry muffins. He often stopped by before finishing his route. Karis, dear, he greeted her as he entered the bakery toward dusk. One of your special muffins, please. While Franklin enjoyed the muffin, Karis asked casually, Franklin, do you deliver mail downtown? Isn't the Legacy Crown on your route? Sure is, he nodded. It's a lovely place. I'm sorry about Eris. Bless her memory. She was a great woman. Yes, Karis said quietly. Listen, I need to get a message to Chef Bram Cassidy. Is that possible? Franklin smiled slyly. For you, Karis, anything is possible, especially if the message comes with one of these muffins. An hour later, Karis received a brief message from Bram, relayed through Franklin. Jackson Bridge, 7 p.m. sharp. Exactly at 7 o'clock, she was on the bridge, watching the slow flow of the Chattahoochee River. The rain had stopped, but the air was damp and cool. Ms. Monroe, a deep voice made her turn. Before her stood a burly man in his mid-40s with short graying hair and piercing blue eyes. His hands, calloused and scarred by burns, betrayed years of work in the kitchen. Mr. Cassidy, Karis held out her hand. Thank you for meeting me. Call me Bram. He shook her hand firmly. Let's take a walk. I don't want us to be seen together. They walked slowly along the waterfront as Bram recounted the events of the last 24 hours. Your mother-in-law arrived this morning with your husband. She introduced herself as the new owner. She showed me some papers, but I didn't examine them. He shook his head. Eris warned me there might be a struggle for the restaurant after her death. She told Nita and me to only trust you. How did the staff react? Cautiously. Most of us have worked with Eris for years. We're not used to sudden changes, Bram said, frowning. But your mother-in-law didn't waste any time. The first thing she did was fire the sous chef Liam, saying he was costing the restaurant too much money. Liam has been with us for 10 years and knows the Crown's menu like the back of his hand. She can't just fire a man like that, Karis said indignantly. Technically, she offered him a severance package, but her tone left no doubt, Bram sighed. Then she announced cuts. She wants to halve the wine list, eliminate some specialties from the menu that she finds too expensive and pretentious. Karis felt anxiety growing inside her. And the table reservations with the regular customers? That's where Nita got nervous. She tried to explain that we have customers who reserve months in advance, that our reputation is built on stability. But Ms. Niles said a new business perspective was more important than old habits. They stopped by the parapet, looking down at the water. Bram turned to Karis. Eris trusted you, Ms. Monroe. She said you have a special gift for sensing what people need, not just to feed them, but to give them experiences, memories. That's rare. Karis smiled, embarrassed. I'm not sure I deserve such high praise. Eris didn't hand out compliments, Bram said firmly. If she thought you were a worthy successor, then you are." "So what now?" Karis asked. "Tamsin, Ms. Niles, will continue changing the restaurant. How long will the staff hold out?" Bram shrugged. "It's hard to say. Some, like Liam, have already left. Others are waiting, watching. Nita is holding firm, though it's hard on her. And me? I'm too old and stubborn to change. But the legacy crown isn't just a job for many of us. It's the family Aries created, and we don't want to lose it." They exchanged contacts, and Bram promised to keep Karis updated. The next day, Karis met with Nita Price, an elegant woman in her 50s who had managed the Legacy Crown almost since its opening. They met at a small cafe away from downtown, and Nita recounted in detail what was happening at the restaurant. "She's fired anyone who dares to contradict her," Nita said, nervously stirring her tea. "She's slashed the wine list and eliminated some of the most expensive dishes from the menu. She replaced the seafood supplier with a dubious company owned by a friend of hers. Bram is furious. The quality of the food has gone down, but the prices are the same." "And the customers?" Karis asked. "The regulars notice the change. Some have already canceled their reservations. Yesterday, Judge Fitzgerald, who has dined there every Friday for 15 years, left without finishing his main course. He said it wasn't the crown he knew." Karis listened with growing alarm. The restaurant's reputation, which Aris had spent decades building, was crumbling before her eyes. And the contracts with the vendors, with the wine cellar that Barkley spoke about? Nita smiled for the first time in the meeting. "That's interesting. Ms. Niles ordered the sale of half the wine collection to optimize assets. But when Edward, the sommelier, tried to access the cellar, it turned out he didn't have the right key. It seems the cellar isn't technically part of the restaurant." "And how did Tamsin react?" "She threw a fit. She demanded immediate access to all assets, but Edward said he could only refer to the registered owner of the wine collection." Nita leaned closer. "That's you, Ms. Monroe, as well as the right to sign most of the vendor contracts. Aris had it all planned." On the 6th day after the takeover, Karis received an unexpected visit. She was closing the bakery when the doorbell rang, and Jarvis walked in. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes. "I finally found you." "I wasn't hiding," she replied calmly, continuing to wipe down the tables. "I've been here the whole time." "You didn't answer your phone. You didn't come home." "I'm sleeping on the couch in the back room. It's quite comfortable." Jarvis looked confused, as if he hadn't expected her to be so calm. "Look, I understand you're upset, but we have to talk. Things have gotten complicated." Karis raised an eyebrow. "Complicated? In what sense?" "The restaurant? There are problems there. Mom has made some changes, and not everyone is happy, especially that Chef Bram. He's sabotaging her orders. And Nita, the manager, keeps referring to a contract that supposedly can't be changed without your signature." "Not supposedly," Karis pointed out. "Yes, they require my signature." Jarvis ran a hand through his hair, nervous. "Look, I know what my mother and I did wasn't right, but we had good intentions. And now we need your help. Talk to the staff and explain to them that Mom is acting on your behalf." "But she's not." Karis looked him in the eye. "I didn't authorize Tamsin to act on my behalf. She took the documents by force, and that gives her no legal right." A few days later, the situation at the restaurant reached a critical point. According to reports from Bram and Nita, Tamsin completely changed the menu, replacing gourmet dishes with simpler, cheaper ones. She fired 3 more employees, including a sommelier who dared to oppose her plans to sell off part of the wine collection. The regular customers began leaving one by one. The press started to notice the changes. A small article in the local paper asked what was happening to the once famous Legacy Crown restaurant. Karis remained calm. She continued working in her bakery, met with former Crown employees, and discussed potential actions with her lawyer, but she took no steps to stop Tamsin. "Why don't you get involved?" Bram asked her during another meeting. "She's destroying everything Aris created." "I know," Karis replied quietly. "But sometimes you have to give a person enough rope to hang themselves." On the 10th day after taking over the restaurant, Tamsin made a fatal mistake. She refused to serve a state representative who had been a regular Crown customer for more than 20 years because a friend of hers, a local businessman with a dubious reputation, wanted his table. The scandal erupted instantly. The representative wrote an angry social media post, and journalists picked up the story. By nightfall, the Legacy Crown was the center of a media storm. Everyone was asking what had become of the legendary restaurant after Eris Holloway's death. And that same night, Bram, unable to bear it, resigned, refusing to cook frozen food dishes at elevated prices. 4 other cooks left with him. Without a chef and half the kitchen staff, with a tarnished reputation and canceled reservations, the Legacy Crown was on the verge of closing. Tamsin, inexperienced in the restaurant business, didn't know how to handle the crisis. Only when the situation became desperate did Jarvis finally realize that his mother wasn't saving the restaurant. She was destroying it with her hasty actions and craving for control. The day after Bram's departure, the Legacy Crown opened later than usual. Tamsin paced around the restaurant trying to find a replacement chef. Her bright pink suit clashed with the elegant interior, designed by Eris with muted colors and dark wood details. "I don't see what the problem is," she announced to the remaining staff, gathering them in the dining room. "If one cook left, we'll find another. Atlanta is full of people who can cook." Nita Price, who was still clinging to her manager position, coughed softly. "Ms. Niles, Bram is not just a cook. He is a Michelin-starred chef who has worked here for 15 years. Many customers come just for his dishes." Tamsin waved her hand dismissively. "Nonsense. People come to the Crown for the reputation and the atmosphere. A star or two, what difference does it make? What matters is that the food is presentable." No one dared to object. The staff exchanged silent glances, realizing their fears had come true. The new owner had no idea about the subtleties of fine dining. Tamsin continued giving instructions. "Robert will handle the chef duties today. We'll keep the menu simple, only the most popular dishes, and no French names. People need to know what they're ordering." Robert, a young chef with 3 years of experience, turned pale. He was talented, but he wasn't ready to take charge of a prestigious restaurant kitchen. "Ms. Niles, I'm not sure I can handle the head chef position. Maybe we should close temporarily and look for a professional replacement for Bram." Tamsin narrowed her eyes. "Close? Don't even think about it. The Crown will not lose a single day. You'll be fine, don't worry. Cook the same dishes as before, only simpler." She turned to Nita. "What are our reservations for today?" Nita consulted her tablet. 18 tables for dinner. 3 of them are regulars, including Senator Harrison. "Excellent, we'll manage." But that night was the beginning of the end for the Legacy Crown. Robert, trying his best, couldn't reproduce Bram's exquisite dishes. Without sous chef Liam and the other experienced chefs, the kitchen was slow and uncoordinated. The dishes came out late and weren't always perfectly cooked. Senator Harrison, a gray-haired gentleman with impeccable manners, returned his steak twice and called Nita over. "My dear, what is going on?" he asked quietly, but with evident concern. "I've been dining here every week for 20 years, and I've never been so disappointed." Nita cast a quick glance in the direction of Tamsin, who was talking to other diners. "We're having temporary difficulties, Senator. Bram is no longer with us." "What?" The senator didn't hide his surprise. "But he is the soul of this place. What happened?" "New leadership, new vision," Nita replied diplomatically. Senator Harrison nodded sympathetically. "I heard Eris left the restaurant to her goddaughter. Is that true?" "Yes, but it's a complicated situation." "I understand," he sighed. "Please give the chef my condolences and my check, please. I'm afraid I won't be able to finish dinner tonight." When the senator left, other disappointed guests followed. By the end of the evening, half the reserved tables were empty. People either left before finishing dinner or simply didn't show up, canceling their reservations at the last minute. Tamsin was furious. "What is going on?" she snapped at Nita as the last diners departed. "Why are there so many cancellations? And what is all this nonsense about picking at the food?" Nita rubbed her temples wearily. "Miss Niles, The Legacy Crown is a fine dining restaurant. Our customers expect a certain level of quality and service. They notice the changes, especially the repeat customers. Then we need new customers, Tamsin cut in. More democratic, less snobby, more normal people who just want good food without all the pretense. But the restaurant's reputation can be changed, Tamsin interrupted. Starting tomorrow, we'll lower the prices by 20% and advertise. I've already made arrangements with the local paper. Nita knew it was useless to argue. Tamsin was deaf to any argument that contradicted her vision. That same night, in the small apartment above the Sweet Dreams Bakery, Karis received an unexpected guest, Jarvis. He looked exhausted, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "I didn't know you lived here," he said, glancing around the modest dwelling. "A temporary solution." Karis placed a cup of tea in front of him. "What brings you here so late?" Jarvis cupped the mug with his hands, as if seeking warmth. "The restaurant isn't going as planned." There was no gloating in Karis's voice, only a touch of irony. "It's gotten complicated. Bram left, several other cooks with him. The customers aren't happy. Mom," he hesitated, "Mom is sure it's just a temporary difficulty, but I don't know." "What did you expect, Jarvis?" Karis asked. "The Legacy Crown isn't just a location and a name. It's the people, the traditions, the reputation forged over the years." Jarvis ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that always betrayed his nervousness. "I know. It's just, Mom was so sure. She had always dreamed of owning her own restaurant." "An opportunity to take someone else's inheritance," Karis finished quietly. Jarvis wrinkled his nose. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that with the papers. It was wrong." Karis looked at her husband, trying to see if his remorse was sincere or just a reaction to the problem. "What do you want from me, Jarvis?" "Help us." He looked at her pleadingly. "Talk to Bram. Convince him to come back. Or at least help us find a new chef. You have contacts in the culinary world." Karis shook her head. "You don't understand. Bram won't come back as long as your mother runs the restaurant. He respected Aries and her vision, and Tamsin. She wants to turn the Crown into something completely different." "She's just trying to make the restaurant more affordable, more profitable," Karis interrupted, "at the expense of quality and reputation." "It won't work, Jarvis. The Legacy Crown has never been a place for ordinary people. It's a restaurant for special occasions, for gourmets, for those who appreciate exceptional quality and are willing to pay for it." Jarvis sighed. "I tried to explain it to Mom, but she won't listen. She's sure she knows best, and you can't stand up to her." It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. Jarvis lowered his eyes, and the gesture was more eloquent than any words. All his life, he had been controlled by an authoritarian mother, and even now, at 36, he couldn't find the strength to contradict her. "I just want things to get better," he said softly. "I want the restaurant to work, and I want you to come home. I want things to go back to how they were." Karis looked at her husband intently. "Nothing will go back to how it was, Jarvis. Too much has changed." The next day, Karis met with Barclay Quinn in his office. The lawyer greeted her with an expression of contained satisfaction. "I hear things aren't going well at the Legacy Crown," he said, gesturing for her to sit down. "Yes," Karis nodded. "Bram is gone. Customers aren't happy. Jarvis came yesterday asking for help." "And what did you tell him?" "That nothing would be the same." She smiled faintly. "But I didn't come here for that. I need your advice on what to do, the possible next steps." Barclay leaned back in his chair, watching her closely. "Do you want to regain control of the restaurant?" "Yes, but not just regain it. I want to create something new, while preserving Eris's legacy." Karis pulled a notebook from her purse. "I've met with Bram, Nita, and other key staff. They are willing to work with me. I have an idea to open a new restaurant elsewhere." Barclay leaned in, interested. "Tell me more." "I found a location near the old Fourth Ward alley. It's smaller than the Crown, but has character. An old building with stone walls and arched windows. The owner is willing to rent it with an option to buy." Karis turned the page of her notebook. I want to open a restaurant called Eris's Legacy there, keeping the best traditions of the Crown, but adding something of my own. Bram will be the chef, Nita, the manager, and the funding. Karis smiled. That's where I'll need your help. Eris mentioned some assets set up separately from the restaurant, besides the wine cellar. Yes, of course. Barkley opened a file. As I said, Eris created a rather complex ownership structure. The wine cellar, valued at over $200,000, is owned by a separate company in which you are the sole shareholder. The professional kitchen equipment is also registered in your name through a leasing company. There is also an investment account Eris created for business development with a sum of about $300,000. Karis listened with increasing surprise. She hadn't known about the investment account. Eris was a prudent woman, Barkley said. She wanted to make sure you had the resources to grow, no matter what happened with the main restaurant. You can use those funds to open a new restaurant, of course. Furthermore, you can take the wine collection and the kitchen equipment from the Legacy Crown at any time. Legally, they belong to you, not the restaurant itself. Karis thought for a moment. And the name, the Legacy Crown, is a well-known brand. The Legacy Crown brand is registered in the name of a company owned by Eris, which you have now taken over. The restaurant building is an independent asset, temporarily managed by Miss Niles, although without legal authority. But the brand, the recipes, the concept, it's all yours. A plan began to form in Karis's mind. She could take everything of value from the Legacy Crown, staff, equipment, wine collection, brand, and move it to a new location, leaving Tamsin with an empty shell. Meanwhile, at the Legacy Crown, the situation worsened daily. The advertising campaign Tamsin launched attracted new customers, but not those the restaurant was designed for. People drawn by the reduced prices were disappointed to find the food still more expensive than at regular establishments, and the quality no longer met the superior level. The older customers, hearing about Bram's departure and the menu changes, canceled their reservations en masse. The wine list, once the Crown's pride, was halved. Tamsin ordered the sale of the most expensive bottles to improve cash flow. But when the sommelier tried to access the cellar, it turned out that only Karis had the keys and codes. On the 7th day after Bram's departure, journalists from an influential food publication visited the restaurant. They planned to do a report on how the Legacy Crown had changed since Eris Holloway's death. Tamsin, unaware of the potential danger, gladly accepted the interview. "The Crown is being refreshed," she said as she posed for a photo in the dining room. "We are making the restaurant more modern, more accessible to everyday Atlantans. Eris created a great establishment, but time is pressing. We have to change to remain relevant." The journalist, a young man with a penetrating gaze, smiled politely as he took notes. "And Bram Cassidy, his departure surprised the culinary community." Tamsin played it down. "Bram is a talented chef, but his vision didn't align with ours. We are looking for a chef who shares our desire for more democratic cuisine." "Democratic?" The journalist raised an eyebrow. "More straightforward, less pretentious, clearer, good dishes. Why do we need all those French terms and tiny portions for enormous sums of money? People just want to eat well." After the interview, the journalist ordered dinner. He chose one of the few Crown specialties left on the menu, lamb fillet with rosemary and truffle mash. The dish, which had been a work of art under Bram, now looked lifeless and standard. The journalist took a few photos, thanked them courteously, and left, barely touching the food. The article came out 2 days later and was the final nail in the Legacy Crown's coffin. The headline read, "Crown in Free Fall: How Atlanta's Legendary Restaurant is Losing Its Greatness." The author detailed the changes since Eris's death, the departure of Bram and other key staff, and the decline in food and service quality. Special attention was paid to the interview with Tamsin, to her words about cuts and democratic cuisine, which the journalist contrasted with Eris Holloway's philosophy, which built the Legacy Crown on principles of exceptional quality and respect for the traditions of fine dining. The article instantly went viral on social media. Bloggers and culinary critics picked up the topic, sharing their memories of the crown from the days of Eris and Bram. Someone even started the hashtag #SaveTheCrownYall. When Jarvis showed his mother the article, Tamsin was furious. "Snobs! They are all snobs!" she shouted, pacing around the empty dining room. "Do they think they know what a restaurant should be?" "Mom, maybe we should rethink our strategy," Jarvis suggested cautiously. "Perhaps go back to the original concept. Find a new chef with fine dining experience." "You're against me too?" Tamsin turned sharply to her son. "I thought you were on my side." "I just want the restaurant to work," Jarvis said tiredly. "And now we are losing customers, money, and reputation." "I don't need those snobby customers. New ones will come who appreciate my vision." But the new customers didn't come. After the scathing article, there were even fewer reservations. On Friday nights, usually the busiest, there were only 3 couples sitting at the Legacy Crown. On the 9th day after Bram's departure, the final and decisive blow arrived. In the morning, men in suits entered the restaurant with documents. "We represent the owner of the wine collection and the kitchen equipment," they informed a stunned Tamsin. "According to the contracts, these assets can be seized at any time at the owner's request." "What owner?" Tamsin was indignant. "This restaurant is mine." "The premises are yours, Ms. Niles, but not the equipment or the wine collection. They belong to Ms. Karis Monroe." That same day, the professional kitchens, refrigerators, wine cellar, and even some of the furniture that was also decorated separately from the premises were removed from the Legacy Crown. In the evening, Jarvis found his mother sitting in the empty restaurant with a bottle of whiskey. "It's over," she said in a lifeless voice. "Without equipment, we can't operate. Without wine, we don't have half the profits. The staff is scattering." Jarvis sat beside her, unsure what to say. For the first time in his life, he saw his bossy, always confident mother broken. "We could buy new equipment," he suggested without much conviction. Tamsin laughed bitterly. "With what money? Do you know how much a professional kitchen costs? And the wine collection that Iris had amassed over 30 years? She took a sip directly from the bottle. "We've been played, Jarvis. Your wife was trickier than I thought." On the 10th day of Tamsin's takeover of the restaurant, a notice appeared on the door of the Legacy Crown, closed for renovations, but those in the know realized there would be no renovation. The legendary restaurant, Eris Holloway's life's work, had ceased to exist, at least as Atlantans knew and loved it. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, in an old building with stone walls and arched windows, work was in full swing on a new restaurant. Eris's Legacy was preparing to open its doors, bringing together the best of what Eris Holloway had created and adding Karis's new ideas. That night, as the Legacy Crown closed, Karis's phone rang. Jarvis's name appeared on the screen. Karis stared at the flashing screen, taking her time to answer. Jarvis's name on the screen brought up mixed feelings. Part of her wanted to ignore the call. The other part was curious to know what had made her husband reach out to her now that the Legacy Crown had finally closed. The phone kept ringing. After the 5th tone, she answered, "Hello?" Her voice was neutral, without a hint of emotion. "Karis!" Jarvis's voice was drenched in panic. "Thank God you answered. We have to talk. It's urgent." "About what?" She tried to remain calm, though somewhere inside she felt a pang of satisfaction at how desperate her husband sounded. "The restaurant, the Crown." He sighed convulsively. "Everything has collapsed, Karis. Mom is hysterical. The lawyers are talking about possible bankruptcy because of the rent payments and vendor contracts. You have to help." Karis remained silent, giving Jarvis a chance to talk. She was sitting in a small office at the back of the premises where her new restaurant was due to open in a week. On the table in front of her were sample menus that Bram and she had been working on for the past few days. "Karis, can you hear me?" Jarvis's voice sounded desperate. "This is a disaster. Mom invested in renovations and new furniture. She took out a loan against her house. If the restaurant doesn't reopen, she will lose everything." "What can I do to help?" Karis asked, maintaining the same calm tone. Can you? Jarvis hesitated, as if afraid to say what he wanted to say out loud. Can you talk to Bram, convince him to come back, or help us find a new chef, or return all the equipment and the wine collection? Karis finished for him. Yes. There was hope in his voice. Can you do it? Mom is willing to do whatever it takes. She admits she was wrong, that she was hasty with the changes. Karis interrupted Jarvis. I can't return the equipment and the wine. They have already been installed and placed in the new facility. What new facility? The confusion in Jarvis's voice turned into alarm. Karis took a deep breath. She knew this conversation was inevitable, but she would have preferred to have it in person rather than on the phone. I'm opening a new restaurant, Jarvis. Eris's Legacy. I have Bram, Nita, and most of the Crown staff with me. There was silence on the other end of the line, then a choked laugh, more like a sob. So all this time, while Mom and I were trying to save the Crown, you were plotting your own restaurant, stealing our staff, our equipment? I haven't stolen anything, Jarvis. Karis's voice was still calm, but there was a note of steel in it. Everything I took belonged to me legally. The staff left of their own accord because they didn't want to work with your mother. You planned everything, Jarvis sounded accusatory. You knew what you were doing from the beginning. No, Karis answered truthfully. At first I was surprised by what you did to me. Then I got angry, and then I realized that Eris's legacy wasn't the walls of the Legacy Crown. It was the people, the traditions, the recipes, all the things she had spent 30 years building and that your mother had nearly destroyed in 10 days. Jarvis was silent, and Karis imagined him pacing around the empty restaurant, trying to grasp the magnitude of the disaster. I need to see you, he finally said. I need to talk to you in person. Where are you now? Karis thought for a moment. Should she tell him the address of the new restaurant? What if he showed up with Tamsin and made a scene? I'm in the old 4th Ward alley, number 19, she said. But Jarvis, if you come with your mother or with lawyers, I won't talk. I'll come alone, he promised, in 20 minutes. After the conversation ended, Karis put away her phone and got up from the table. She walked to the window and looked out at the Atlanta sunset. The old street where her new restaurant was located was cobblestone and illuminated by stylized lanterns. The perfect place for an establishment that would maintain tradition but not be afraid of novelty. Exactly 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang and Jarvis walked in. He looked exhausted, rumpled shirt, dark circles under his eyes, messy hair, unusual for a man who had always been meticulous about his appearance. Karis stood at the threshold and looked at the room. The restaurant wasn't ready to open yet, but the main work was finished. Natural stone walls, wooden beams on the ceiling, and elegant arched windows created the atmosphere of an old sanctuary. In the center of the room were wooden tables with snow-white tablecloths, the same ones that decorated the Legacy Crown. On the back wall was a glass-doored wine cellar behind which bottles from Eris's famous collection sparkled. Come in, Karis gestured to her husband. Be careful, the cables aren't all hidden near the entrance. Jarvis slowly walked into the room, his eyes fixed on the familiar furniture, the photos of Eris on the walls, and the kitchen utensils visible through the half-open door. So, this is it, he said quietly. All this time, you were plotting this. This, yes, Karis replied simply. Do you want coffee? The kitchen is already working. Jarvis nodded, still stunned by what he was seeing. Karis led him to a small office where they could talk without prying ears. Bram, who was working in the kitchen, nodded a greeting but didn't interrupt the sauce he was preparing. When they sat down at the table with cups of coffee, Jarvis finally spoke. Why didn't you tell me about your plans, that you were going to open your own restaurant? Karis raised her eyebrows in surprise. Would you have listened to me after taking the documents and giving them to your mother? Jarvis lowered his eyes. I did a terrible thing. I know. It's just, Mom was so persuasive. She said you couldn't handle it, that the Crown would go bankrupt under your management, that this was her chance to finally fulfill her dream. And you believed her more than your wife. Karis shook her head. You know, Jarvis, at first, I was devastated by your betrayal. 6 years of marriage, and you so easily took your mother's side against me. It wasn't easy, he objected softly. I was agonizing. I didn't sleep at night, especially when you didn't come home, didn't answer your phone. But you didn't do anything to remedy the situation, Karis finished. Even when it became obvious that your mother was destroying the restaurant, you still did nothing. Jarvis rubbed his face with his hands. I tried to talk to her. I really did. But you know how stubborn she is. She never admits her mistakes. She never listens to anyone's opinion. And you obeyed her all your life. Karis looked at her husband without anger, but rather with regret. You know, this restaurant crisis only proved what was already in our marriage. You could never stand up to your mother, not even for me. Jarvis looked up at her, his eyes full of pain. I love you, Karis. I've always loved you. I know, she replied softly, but sometimes love isn't enough. You have to have the courage to stand by the person you love, even when it's difficult. They fell silent as Jarvis reflected. Then he asked the question that seemed to torment him the most. What about us, Karis? Does our marriage have a future? It was a difficult question that Karis had been asking herself for the past few days. Did she still love Jarvis? Could she forgive his betrayal? Was it possible to rebuild trust after everything that had happened? I don't know, she answered honestly. Right now, all my focus is on opening the restaurant. That is my priority, and our relationship needs time and space for reevaluation. Do you want a divorce? There was pain in his voice. I want clarity, Jarvis, Karis replied. The past few weeks have shown me how much influence your mother had over you and our marriage. I cannot and will not return to the relationship we had. If we are to be together, it must be something new, based on equality and mutual respect. Jarvis nodded, accepting her words. And Mom? He asked. She's desperate. Karis invested all her savings into fixing up the Crown. She took out a loan. It was her decision, Karis said firmly. She could have done the honest thing, admitted I owned the restaurant and offered to work with me. Instead, she chose the path of deception and manipulation. Now she has to face the consequences. You're not going to help her? Not even out of compassion? Karis hesitated for a moment. She wasn't happy about Tamsin's desperation, although part of her thought her mother-in-law was getting what she deserved. But she was willing to reach out to the woman who had scorned her for so long and who had ultimately tried to take her inheritance. I'll see what I can do, she finally said. Perhaps we can reach an agreement on the Crown building, but I will not go back there, and I will not allow Eris's name or her recipes to be used. That is out of the question. Jarvis exhaled with relief. Thank you, Karis. I know you don't have to help after everything we've done, but I'm not doing this for you or your mother, Karis interrupted him. I'm doing it because I don't want Eris's name to be associated with scandals or litigation. She deserves a better legacy. Jarvis stood up, realizing the conversation was over. When is the opening? He asked, looking at the restaurant with different eyes, not as a lost property, but as a new endeavor. In a week, Karis replied. A quiet opening for select guests, and then the official launch. He hesitated. You'll invite me. Karis looked at her husband intently. His eyes showed sincere hope mixed with fear of rejection. We'll see, she said quietly. A lot depends on what you do in the coming days. When Jarvis left, Karis sat in her office, reflecting on the strange turns of fate. Until a month ago, her life had seemed predictable and stable. A small bakery, a marriage with Jarvis, occasional dinners with Eris. Now everything had changed. She was the owner of a successful restaurant, her marriage was hanging by a thread, and her relationship with Tamsin seemed to be taking a new, healthier course. A knock on the door pulled her out of her musings. It was Bram. Ms. Monroe? The chef still addressed her formally, even though they had been working side by side for several weeks. "I've finished the main menu. I'd like to go over a few details with you." Karis smiled, setting aside her personal thoughts. "Of course, Bram. And please, call me Karis. We're partners now." The chef nodded with a slight smile on his usually serious face. "How did the conversation with your husband go?" he asked, placing the menu sheets on the table. "Better than I expected," Karis replied sincerely. "He finally understood what happened, and he seems to realize his mistake. And his mother, she is more complicated." Karis sighed. "She invested in the crown, took out a loan. Now everything could be gone." Bram chuckled. "She got what she deserved. Eris would be turning in her grave if she saw what that woman did to her restaurant." "I know," Karis agreed. "But I don't want our success to be based on someone else's pain, even if it's deserved. Maybe we can find a way to help her without sacrificing what's important to us." Bram looked at her closely. "You are very much like Eris," he said suddenly. "She, too, always sought solutions that didn't leave scorched earth in their wake, even when dealing with people who didn't deserve it." Those words touched Karis deeply. To be like Eris, to continue her legacy not only in the kitchen but in the way she treated people, was the best compliment she could receive. "Thank you, Bram," she said quietly. "That means a lot to me." They moved on to discussing the menu, and she was absorbed in her work, pushing her personal worries to the background. There was still a lot to do before the grand opening, and she was determined to create a restaurant that Eris would be proud of. That night, just as she was about to leave, the phone rang again. This time, Barclay Quinn's name appeared on the screen. "Ms. Monroe," the lawyer's voice sounded professional. "I have news about the Legacy Crown building. There has been an offer to buy it from a restaurant group in New York. They are interested in entering the Atlanta market and are willing to pay a good price." Karis thought for a moment. Selling the building would solve many financial problems, but something prevented her from accepting immediately. "Could we think about it until tomorrow?" she asked. "I have an idea I'd like to discuss with you." "Of course," Barclay accepted. "I'll be in the office from 9 a.m. When they finished talking, Karis stood in the middle of the nearly finished restaurant. The sunset light streamed through the arched windows, creating strange shadows on the stone walls. Eris's legacy was already acquiring a soul of its own, different from the Legacy Crown, but preserving its best traditions. The idea that occurred to Karis was risky, but potentially profitable for all parties. Instead of selling the Crown building, she could offer Tamsin the lease to open a completely different restaurant there with a new name, a new concept aimed at a wider audience. This was what Tamsin was trying to do with the Crown, but without destroying the existing legacy. That would require Tamsin to humble herself and admit her mistakes, qualities Karis knew she was not abundant in. But desperation sometimes worked wonders with human character. Karis smiled at her thoughts. Eris had always said that in the restaurant business, as in life, it was important not only to know how to prepare exquisite dishes, but also to find solutions that left a pleasant aftertaste for everyone involved. Perhaps this was exactly the solution she had just found. With these thoughts, Karis left the restaurant, feeling that for the first time in a long time, she was looking toward the future with genuine optimism. Regardless of what Tamsin decided or how her relationship with Jarvis turned out, she knew that Eris's legacy would be her own triumph, a place where she could finally realize her talent and vision while continuing the work of her dear godmother. The morning of the grand opening of Eris's legacy was surprisingly sunny for Atlanta. Karis arrived at the restaurant before 7, when the first rays of sunlight began to illuminate the cobblestones of the old Fourth Ward. She wanted to be alone inside before the hustle and bustle of the day ahead. The restaurant had been transformed in the last week. The stone walls, which seemed cold, were now decorated with antique photographs of Atlanta streets and portraits of Eris at different times in her life. In the center of the room was an arrangement of fresh flowers, lavender and wild herbs, Eris's favorite combination. The white tablecloths on the wooden tables, the polished silver cutlery, the crystal glasses. Everything spoke of the refined elegance for which the Legacy Crown was famous in its best moments. Karis walked slowly through the hall, touching the backs of the chairs, checking the arrangement of the tables. Then she peeked into the kitchen, where work was already quietly underway. Bram and his team were preparing for the evening's opening. The chef greeted her with a respectful smile, but didn't interrupt the sauce he was preparing. "Everything is going according to plan," Nita said, appearing at her side with a clipboard in hand. 24 confirmed reservations. The wine is being served from the cellar. The menus are printed. Staff will be ready by 5. Karis nodded gratefully. Nita and Bram's support during these weeks had been invaluable. Without their experience and knowledge, it was unlikely she would have managed to open the restaurant on such short notice. "How do you feel?" Nita asked, looking at Karis intently. "Ready for the big day?" "Yes and no," Karis replied sincerely. "I've been waiting for this moment, but now I'm a little scared. Eris built her reputation over 30 years, and I'm just her goddaughter, who still runs a small bakery." Nita put her hand on Karis's shoulder. "Eris saw things in you that you still don't see in yourself. She never made decisions lightly, especially when it came to her life's work. If she chose you to be her successor, she had absolute confidence in your abilities." Those words gave Karis confidence. She took a deep breath and smiled. "Thank you, Nita. It's time to stop doubting and do what needs to be done." The day flew by in the final preparations. Karis checked every detail, from the arrangement of the colors to the lighting, from the temperature of the wine to the immaculate uniforms of the staff. She wanted the first night of Eris's legacy to be impeccable. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, with only 1 hour left until the opening, there was a knock on the door. Karis, who was checking the table settings at the moment, flinched in surprise. Behind the glass door stood Jarvis, with a bouquet of white roses, Karis's favorite flowers. He looked out of place without his usual business suit. He was wearing simple jeans and a blue shirt, and incipient stubble was growing on his face. Karis hesitated, but opened the door. "Hello," Jarvis said quietly. "I know you're busy, but I wanted to see you before the opening. I wish you luck." He held out the bouquet and Karis accepted it with mixed feelings. Part of her still resented her husband for betraying her, but another part appreciated the gesture of support. "Thank you," she said. "I didn't expect to see you today." "I'm not staying for the opening," Jarvis quickly added. "I know my presence might be inappropriate, especially for the staff. I just wanted to tell you that I'm proud of you. What you've done in such a short time is impressive." Karis looked at her husband in silence, trying to decipher his motives. Was it genuine admiration or an attempt to regain her favor? "How is your mother?" she asked, changing the subject. Jarvis's face darkened. "Not well. She's still in shock about how things turned out. She invested all her savings in renovating the Crown, and now she's left with an empty premises and debts." "I've been talking to Barclay about possible solutions," Karis said. "There's a buyer for the building, a restaurant group from New York, but I was thinking of another option." Jarvis looked surprised. "What was that?" "Tamsin can rent the premises at a reasonable price," Karis explained. "Not to continue the Legacy Crown, that name will stay with me, but to create a new restaurant with her own concept, something more democratic, as she wanted, but without destroying the existing legacy." Jarvis looked at her in amazement. "You would do that? After everything she did?" Karis shrugged. "I'm not doing it for her. I'm doing it because it's what Eris would do. She always sought solutions that benefited all parties." Jarvis shook his head as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You are an incredible woman, Karis. Only now am I truly beginning to understand that." He paused and added in a quieter voice, "I had a serious talk with Mom, the first serious talk in years. I told her that her manipulation and control had ruined our marriage and almost ruined my life, that I would no longer allow her to interfere in my decisions." "And how did she react?" Karis asked, genuinely interested. "At first, she was furious." Jarvis smiled weakly. "She blamed you for everything. She said I was an ungrateful son. But then, when her emotions calmed down, I think she started to understand. At least she admitted that she acted impulsively with the restaurant, that she should have learned more about the business before changing everything. "That's progress," Karis commented. "Yes," Jarvis said thoughtfully. "By the way, I got an apartment. I've decided we both need space to think, and I need to learn to live on my own without Mom's influence." Karis was surprised. It was a decision that required a lot of courage on Jarvis's part, who had spent his whole life living with or near his mother. "I'm happy for you," she said sincerely. "That's an important step." They stood in silence, and there was more understanding in that silence than in many of their previous conversations. "I have to go," Jarvis finally said. "You have a big night ahead of you. I just wanted you to know that I'm working on myself, and I hope that someday you can trust me again." He turned to leave, but Karis called out to him. "Jarvis, tell your mother that my offer to rent the building is still on the table. Tell her to contact Barkley if she's interested." Jarvis nodded gratefully and left, leaving Karis with a bouquet of white roses and mixed feelings. Precisely at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the doors of Aris's Legacy opened to the first guests. Among the attendees were longtime friends of Aris, loyal Legacy Crown customers, well-known food critics, and several members of the press. Karis personally greeted each guest, feeling both excited and strangely calm, as if Aris were invisibly present to support her. The dinner was organized as a tribute to Aris Holloway. The menu included both her classic dishes and new interpretations created jointly by Bram and Karis. Each dish was accompanied by a small card with the story of its creation or an anecdote from Aris's life. When all the guests were seated, Karis stood up to give a brief speech. "Good evening," she began, and the room fell silent. "Thank you for coming to share this very special moment with us." Aris's Legacy was created not only as a restaurant, but as an extension of the work of my godmother, Aris Holloway, who taught me that food is not just nourishment for the body, but also for the soul. She paused for reflection. 30 years ago, Aris opened a small cafe that became the legendary Legacy Crown. Today, we begin a new chapter in that story. We maintain the tradition and quality that made the Crown famous, but we are adding something of our own. Aris always said, "Honor the past, but look to the future." That is the principle we follow. The guests nodded in approval, and many raised their glasses in agreement. "Tonight," Karis continued, "Chef Bram Cassidy and his team will present dishes that reflect the soul of Southern American cuisine with a modern twist. Each dish has its own story, its own character. We hope these stories resonate in your hearts as they once did in ours." She raised her champagne glass. "To Aris Holloway, whose passion for cooking and love for people has inspired us all, and I toast to new beginnings that preserve the best of the past." The room erupted in applause, and the dinner began. The dishes followed one another, each a small work of art: lamb fillet with rosemary and truffle mash, Aris's specialty, fish cooked according to an old Georgia recipe with modern touches, and desserts personally created by Karis, including her famous lavender and honey cake. Critics took notes, photographers captured every dish, and guests exchanged enthusiastic comments. Karis went from table to table, listening to the feedback, telling stories about Aris, and answering questions about the restaurant's future plans. By the end of the evening, it was clear. The opening of Aris's Legacy had been a resounding success. Journalists promised glowing articles. Critics predicted Michelin stars in the near future. Loyal Legacy Crown customers expressed their joy that the spirit of their favorite restaurant was still alive. When the last diner left, it was already past midnight. The staff, though tired, were thrilled. Bram allowed himself a wide smile for the first time in a long time as he accepted congratulations from his team. "We did it," Nita told Karis when they were alone in the empty hall. "Aris would have been proud." "This is just the beginning," Karis replied. But in her voice, there was confidence and anticipation, not anxiety. The next day, news of Aris's Legacy's opening appeared in every local newspaper and food blog. The reviews were excellent, reservations poured in, and the restaurant phone wouldn't stop ringing. A week later, Karis received a surprise visit. Tamsin Niles, dressed in a modest gray suit instead of her usual bright attire, appeared at the restaurant between lunch and dinner when the hall was almost empty. "May I speak with the owner?" she asked Nita, who, surprised to see her, led her to Karis's office. Karis greeted her mother-in-law with courteous restraint. Tamsin pointed to the chair opposite her desk. "To what do I owe this visit?" Tamsin looked uncharacteristically uncertain, almost fragile. She sat down, carefully smoothed her skirt, and remained silent for a while, as if thinking about something. "I came to talk about your offer," she finally said, "the lease of the Crown Building." Karis nodded, waiting for her to continue. "At first, I wanted to refuse," Tamsin admitted. "Pride wouldn't let me accept help from—" She hesitated. "From someone I have treated badly." "I understand," Karis replied calmly. "But then I looked at the empty building.